Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Recruiting Made Easy, a Chatbot Solution for Recruiters. My name is Mary Rowling, and welcome. We really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us this Wednesday morning. Just a little bit about us, who we are and what we do. We are IMPIGER Technologies. We have been in business for 15 years and developed custom IT services. We've built over 500 mobile and web applications and implement the latest technologies, including RPA and AI, including our new bot-making platform, Bluefish. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about our company, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to assist. Our speaker today is Travis McCollum, IMPIGER's Chatbot Solution Consultant. Before we get started, I just want to say if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the Q&A panel in WebEx. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Travis.
Thank you, Mary. Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Travis McCollum. Today we want to talk about recruitment and chatbots and how chatbots are revolutionizing the recruitment industry and helping recruiters do their job better. So today's agenda, we're just going to do a quick overview of what chatbots are, some of the recruiting trends that chatbots are doing across the field, and we'll go through the full cycle recruiting steps and identify where the chatbot fits in each of those categories. Finally, we'll talk about some of the big concerns that people have with chatbots in the recruiting space, and we'll look at a few example bots of recruitment in action. To begin with, let's just talk about chatbots in general. A chatbot really is a user interface that represents your company identity, the brand of what your company is all about, and it connects with users across many different mediums and platforms. So in a sense, a chatbot is an employee of your company, and it's a brand ambassador. And chatbots can really exist on two different fronts, in the text space, but also in the voice space as well. Today we're specifically going to talk more on the text side, but I will say that trending is the integration of voice and chat text meshing together really well. So when we think about recruiting trends, according to a study that's going on by the University of Bamberg back in 2017 called Recruiting Trends, only 3.3% of the top 1,000 companies are currently using digital career advisors. But that's telling us that 53.2% of those candidates are believing that future chatbots are going to allow people to ask different company questions. Allegis, A-L-L-E-G-I-S, did a recent survey that says that 58% of candidates are comfortable interacting with both artificial intelligence and recruitment chatbots, especially in the early stages of that application process. And an even larger percentage, 66%, are even comfortable with AI and chatbots taking care of the interview scheduling and preparation steps as well. When we think about the top of the funnel recruiting activities, 80% of that can be automated nowadays. And finally, just with the amount of resumes that are coming in on a daily basis, especially with those entry-level jobs, 65% is estimated to be ignored just because recruiters can't keep up with the volume. So when you implement a chatbot solution, you're able to connect with those 65% that may be missing out as the special one. So when we think about the recruitment cycle, we kind of break it down in a couple steps. And I'll say personally, I've worked in the recruiting field, especially in sourcing and vetting for candidates. In the preparation phase, this is often where recruiters are figuring out that there's a need for a new job position within a company. Maybe somebody's leaving and they need a replacement, or maybe an entirely new position has been created. Then the recruiter goes into finding out where to find those people, and there's a lot of avenues for that. Usually it's through job boards like LinkedIn or Indeed, LinkedIn being a job board, but also a social media site as well. And we know the power of social media, but there are a lot of other places like job portals that exist for industry specific. Once you figure out where you're going, then you go into the actual screening portion. So applicants usually come on board through passive searches where they'll contact you through a job posting you put up there, or maybe you'll actually contact them first because you read their LinkedIn profile and you want to learn more about them and get them in an interview. So that screening process is where they fill out the application, and your ATS system typically tracks whether they are a good fit based off of their resume versus the job qualifications. And that ties into the pre-screening, but once you find a good fit, then you bring them in the next step, which is selecting or the interviewing process. Once you've gone through 1, 2, maybe 3 interviews, depending on what your company process is, that's when you offer the jobs through the hiring process. And then sometimes you have to reject the applicant as well, so there's both spectrums there. Now, one area that really gets missed out on is the onboarding process, because the recruitment cycle still continues through that. Even though the recruiter may hand off the new hire to the HR team, there still is a part in that, and we'll talk on that in a bit. So let's go through the first step, which is preparing. And we know that for a recruiter, you have to figure out what the job description of the person you're trying to fill. But when we think about chatbots as a solution, chatbots are that user interface who's going to be the first point of contact with an applicant. So let's say that a chatbot's living on your website and an applicant is interacting with that chatbot. The chatbot needs to be approachable, and it needs to be reflecting your company as an employee. So there's a process of developing or creating a persona for a bot as well, and that can be included with the personality, the different traits that kind of represent what the bot is, how the profile plays out, and into the tone and diction of that voice. One example of a bot persona may be in a trucking company, first instance, where you're looking to hire truckers, and you have to think about what is it that truckers like to see whenever they're interacting with some kind of person. And with that, you can really kind of define what that avatar, that look is. Another thing to consider is just that color scheme as well. Your company has its own style guide that you can get through marketing that can really kind of brand those colors and that look and that feel based off of that as well. And then finally, figure out what those words, that language that you're going to use with your bot. Maybe you're from Texas and y'all use the word y'all, or maybe it's a bit more formal and the language itself is going to be very structured and rigid and professional. So identifying these elements on how you're going to create your bot as your first point of contact is super important. Once you've created the persona for the bot, and you go into the sourcing step, you've got to think about where are your candidates going to interact with you and learn about you, and that's where you want to be deploying your bot. So there's so many benefits to bots that exist out there, and just to mention some of the general ones is that bots can be online 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So day or night, they're available to interact with your customers or your applicants in real time. In addition to that, A bot can have one single bot can have simultaneous interactions with literally thousands of applicants at one given time. And that bot can exist on multiple different areas at once. It can be on your company website. It can be on your Facebook account. It can be on your Skype account. It can be on your company intranet, which we'll talk more on the onboarding side later. But also, if you have an app that exists that your company currently uses, then your potential prospects can connect there as well. So figuring out where you want your bot to live is another step that we need to consider to meet those candidates. Once your candidates finally find your bot and they're interested in learning about the company, this is the bot's chance to really interact with the candidate and make that first impression as that point of contact for the company for the first time. And when you think about how those interactions go, we often want to think about how the recruiter is benefiting from the chatbot's existence, but also how the candidate is existing from the bot's existence as well. For recruiter, it really ties into that pre-screening process where when it finally does make it into the interview process, we know that those candidates have been pre-screened and they've been qualified and that their resumes have been parsed and picked to meet whatever job descriptions or scope that you set out. It's also a great tool for collecting lead generation information because you're getting their phone number, you're getting their email address, you're putting them in your database for future interactions. So while a candidate may not be a good fit initially, you can use their data to reconnect with them when the right position opens up down the line. Maybe there's a job certificate where the person doesn't have the required experience, but after a certain point, maybe a year, suddenly they meet those requirements. Your ATS will be able to communicate that, and the chatbot can be that initial collection of information. Finally, on the screening side, once a qualified candidate is made, the chatbot can connect with your calendar and find openings for you to for the applicant to schedule an appointment with you. And that's really nice because overnight you could be sleeping and come in the morning and find that your calendar has been filled with appointments without you having to do any of that scheduling yourself. So that's a really great feature that chatbots can do for recruiters. Once a appointment is set, one thing that I really want to drive is that chatbots and artificial intelligence are not taking over recruiters' jobs. There's a lot of fear out there that robots are taking over humans, and that really isn't the case. They're here to help us and to supplement us, and there's never going to be a replacement for the phone or the on-site interview. That's just not something that bot technology can replicate right now. However, the bot's there to help to make sure that you're not wasting your time with candidates that aren't going to be a good fit. And one of the areas that they really help is getting those real-time background checks by integrating with the database systems and collecting that personal information on people to make sure that they don't have any bad criminal records or drug problems, and that their credit and their other things are in place so that they are a healthy employee that's going to fit in with your company and not just jump ship after 1 or 2 months. Really helpful because of that quick, expedient screening and background check process. Now the good part, once the interview goes well and you're ready to throw those job offers out, chatbot can really help there too. One thing I'll say is that ideally, people love hearing a phone call personally from the recruiter with the job offer, but recruiters really don't like giving the bad news to people when they don't get the job. When I think about when people are going through an interview and they finish the interview and they think it went really well and they're really anxious to hear back from the recruiter. The reality of the world is the recruiter is meeting with so many applicants. Sometimes they don't have the time or to get back to an interviewee and let them know how the progress went because they've got another interview signed up. So one of the great benefits of a chatbot is you're able to give interviewees those status updates on how the progress of their application is going down the pipeline, whether you're on the first or second or third interview, whether you're still being considered, or whether you've been passed on because of whatever reasons. And to tie that in even more, the recruiter can even include quick footnotes so that the applicant can get that real-time feedback and they can know why they didn't get the job. So maybe if they want to reapply later, they can get the right job. And a chatbot is a really great tool for providing that feedback and sending out that rejection message to applicants. It really helps them out. Now, on the subject of onboarding, once the recruiter hands off the employee and he or she gets integrated into the company, there's a lot of extra pieces that the chatbot helps to facilitate. And that's everything from informing the new employee on company policies. One of the great things about chatbots is their media-rich functionality that exists out there. Chatbots are not only text-based or voice-based, but they can also provide videos, they can provide different pictures and documents. So an employee could download the employee handbook directly from the chatbot. But the chatbot can also process different types of payroll requests or vacation or leave things that may come up. And I'll jump a little bit more on that here later, but the chatbot continues to exist with the employee throughout its entire time with the company, from recruiting to onboarding to even leaving the company as well. So it's a really powerful feature. One final thing I'll mention on the onboarding section is the FAQ area. When you're having an employee interact with the bot for the first time, whenever you're having a visitor who is considering employment with the company for the first time, the bot's there to answer any questions the prospect may have, whether it be on the company culture, the pay for the jobs, if you want to share that information, or any other frequently asked questions that recruiters may get. This is super helpful because it's helping to eliminate the repetitive questions that recruiters find themselves answering over and over again. And it lets the recruiter focus on those more meaningful tasks and to identify those outlier questions that don't get asked very often. One of the big concerns that exist out there for chatbots are on information security, auditing, scalability, and legal boundaries. So I want to touch base on these 4 concerns. To start with, information security is a big thing with just the Internet of Things and, the cyberspace in general. But really, chatbots and security function much like you would discover in a financial or banking situation. It all ties down to authentication and authorization, especially when you have your chatbot preside on your company intranets. So people will need to provide login credentials to be able to access some of that personal information. Now, when we think about recruitment and chatbots, people are submitting their phone numbers and their emails to the recruiter to contact. And integrating with different programs like your software CRM or your ATS systems, there is a level of authentication that needs to go with that. And the chatbot works with that to make sure that there is encryption included in that. So that's a big concern that people have, but I wanted to let you know that it does work that way. Another thing is on auditing, and this will go more into the analytics side, but internal audits to see bot performance and ways to optimize performance to have better interactions with visitors and to learn from visitors' interactions is a huge part of where bot performance comes in. And there's a whole area of analytics and dashboards where you can look at those unhandled messages and optimize the bot to improve its performance for future reference. Scalability is another thing, and this again ties a little bit into the unhandled messages, and I'll touch base on it, but basically bots, as we mentioned before, can live multiple places at one time and have simultaneous interactions. So functionally, it has the capacity to go large at scale at any capacity, but the challenge is in its ability to comprehend and understand what other outlying questions are on the market. And what this really means is that bots are not omnipotent, but they are constantly learning, and that's where the artificial intelligence portion comes in. And finally, just the legal boundary. One area that people are concerned is when you're sharing confidential information, whether they be contracts or NDA disclosures, those things over a chatbot are a concern as well. And it ties into a big ethical subject that's beyond the scope of this, but just to be aware that it does exist. And it really kind of connects with information security on making sure that you have the right credentials to access that information. So we're going to talk about two example bots of how recruitment is being played in the market today. The first one is on Airbus, and this is a aeronautical defense and space company. And this is just a quick snapshot of what the opening page looks like. Here on the bottom right is where the chatbot initially resides. And you can see that it starts with a very clear call to action for the visitor. The visitor is on this page because it's interested in the company and career options. So now it knows that the visitor knows that if it has any questions, it can click this button down here. When you click the button, you get introduced to Bessie, which is the bot that exists. And I want to point out a couple things here. We mentioned early on in the preparing stage that developing a persona that resonates with your brand, but also with the ideal applicants that you want to recruit is super important. So here we're looking at the color scheme, but more importantly, we're looking at how the language plays across. So we can tell that Bessie is very professional, very knowledgeable, and very helpful in what she's portraying to a potential visitor. Also, when we think about bot creation, and this is more on the development side, is when we look at user experience and the UI design on the website, you really want to make things convenient and simple and easy for your users. And besides just free text responses, these easy reply buttons at the bottom give the user options to learn more about the company and to figure out different ways to interact with the bot. Another example bot is Pitney, which is a tech company for mailing solutions. Pitney has a chatbot for recruitment and has some really great features that I wanted to point out. And one of the first ones is the voice option that really assists and facilitates for different handicap options. So if you prefer to speak with the bot and your laptop or computer or mobile phone has that option, then you can speak with the bot rather than text. But the duality of the chatbot is a very attractive feature. The second thing is in multilingual, it has the capacity to do Spanish as well as English, which is very helpful, especially if the type of employees that it works with is really kind of tying into the diversity aspect of business. And then finally, the shorthand commands. It's really nice when you can type in single letters or shorthand answers to get things across. Another great feature of this one is how the job options are pulled from the applicant tracking system based off of the user preference. So in this particular case, the user inputs whether maybe a city or a state or a zip code where they live, and then the applicant tracking system is pulled from the chatbot based off of those preferences to offer the jobs in that area. When you find the job that you want, for instance, in this case, we hit the 2 for the digital sales executive. When there's a lot of information that a chatbot doesn't want to overwhelm the user with, it has those rich media choices where it can redirect them to fill out a more in-depth application. And it can follow up with that information later down the line. Whenever you're developing a chatbot, you do want to keep it simple. If you were to include the entire application in the chatbot window, it would be very cumbersome and not make much sense. After all, a chatbot is meant to be a conversation and not a form itself. I want to highlight a summary of the journey that we just went through and kind of visually demonstrate what a chatbot interaction may look like. Here on the left, we have multiple candidates that are entering a experience with the chatbot, and they go into the chatbot however you create it, and that can be existing anywhere from your Facebook page to your website to your mobile app that may exist on their phone. And here on the top part, it has the click to chat. Usually, the way chatbots have been structured is it's user initiated. So the user makes that first contact with the chatbot by clicking the click here to learn more about us. And then the conversation starts. And here in the bottom middle portion, we have an example of our platform, Bluefish, and all the different pieces that the chatbot's pulling information from. It's looking at the candidate profile based off of the information the candidate provides, whether it be the jobs that they're interested in, whether it be their contact information for the lead generation side. It even looks at their location through different GPS coordinate systems that exist out there. It has populated FAQ questions to be able to help with any questions the company may, the user may have. It's recording the conversation so that you can review it later. It's looking at the analytics of it, and it's also looking at the abandonment track, where the user falls off in the conversation, where the user got bored or they got stuck, so that all of this information that the chatbot's gathering can be tied towards an optimization track later down the line. Here in the top right, I mentioned briefly about background checks and applicant tracking systems, but the chatbot is connecting in real time with those systems and being that mediator between the client and the brand. And finally, all that information it's collecting is alerting your different CMS systems, whether it be Salesforce or with your calendar system through Office 365. It's scheduling and it's sharing that information with those other systems. And just to briefly touch on what the big benefits are for both the candidate and for the recruiters, you can see that there are a lot of great points that drive through that. We've got visitors that are having a better user experience, so they're getting more information about the company and getting a personalized experience that is geared toward what they are seeking out. So the recruiters are definitely getting more qualified candidates because the chatbot is pre-screening through that process. And finally, we'll touch base, just the engagement aspect is really powerful for both the candidates so that we know that their voices are being heard.
Thank you, Travis. That was great. I know we're just about at time, but there's a couple questions we can go through. Let me see. Here's the first one. Whenever I interact with a bot, it tends to not know the answers to my questions. It's very frustrating. How do you deal with that? Great question.
So the short answer is that chatbots are only as good as their developers. They are not omnipotent. So chatbots are learning, and they are optimizing their approach over time. They're getting smarter with each interaction. But if I were to explain how chatbots operate with an analogy, they're a lot like humans in the sense that they start out as these children not really knowing a lot, very curious, and they grow over time into this mature adult. So from a developer standpoint, the bot's amassing many unhandled messages every day, and they need that human intervention so the developer can teach the bot and train it to understand and respond to different future questions and comments that it may receive.
Okay, great. Here's another one. Can I deploy a chatbot on LinkedIn?
This is a yes and no. There was a piece that went out a while ago, and LinkedIn did introduce its own form of chatbots, but the chatbots don't work traditionally like steering you through a whole conversation, but instead it's like a little helper that's suggesting things to talk about or, quote, break the ice. Basically, it's suggesting responses and meetings and insights to help users have more important conversations with the right people in either their networks or within their second or third degrees. So what I will say about LinkedIn and chatbot technology is while it hasn't been in a position where developers can deploy their own bots, it is catching up. It's just taking a matter of time.
Thank you, Travis. I think we have time for just one more. How does a chatbot work with onboarding with so many stakeholders involved?
How does a chatbot work with onboarding, especially when there's so many people involved? The big thing is integration and authentication for the onboarding. So chatbots are definitely integrating with a lot of existing CRM systems like QuickBooks or WebHR. And in an example, from a payroll perspective, the employee might get pinged for requests from the bot, and then he or she can submit that info to the HR person, who on the other end is going to give that confirmation or the final approval for the bot to perform that necessary action. So integration of employee bots is working really well in a project management system where bots are able to be onboarded as team members in those group chats outside of just one-on-one interactions. But that conversation is definitely for another day.
All right, thank you, Travis, so much. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. You will be receiving in your email a PDF of our deck and a recording of this if you ever want a reference to it, so be on the lookout for that. We just want to thank you so much again for spending some time with us today, and we hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.